My son-in-law slid a clipboard across the dinner table the first time I asked to take my granddaughter to the zoo. Not a piece of paper, a clipboard, like he was the manager at a car dealership and I was applying for credit. He'd printed it on the same letterhead he uses for his real estate firm. My name typed at the top, a signature line at the bottom, and 17 numbered conditions in between. I remember looking down at it and laughing once, this small awkward sound that came out of me before I could stop it, because for half a second I thought it was a joke. Then I looked at my daughter and she wouldn't meet my eyes and I understood it wasn't. Just so everyone knows where we stand, he said. His name is Theodore. He goes by Teddy with his friends. And Theodore with his clients and I, evidently, was being addressed in his client voice. My daughter sat across from him, hands folded on the placemat, the way she used to sit in the principal's office in middle school when she was about to be told something she didn't want to hear. She'd been the one who invited me to dinner. Pot roast, she'd said on the phone, like it was a peace offering before there was anything to make peace about. My granddaughter, Bryn, was upstairs in her room playing with a dollhouse I'd given her 2 birthdays ago. She was 4 years old and didn't know yet that the adults downstairs were drawing lines around her. That was almost 3 years ago now. The dollhouse is still in their basement somewhere, packed in a box, and I haven't seen the inside of that house in over a year. My name is Hollis Carmody. I'm 58 years old. I spent 33 years working as a freight dispatcher for a regional trucking company outside Toledo, Ohio, and I retired early when my wife got sick. Her name was Faye. She passed 2.5 years ago, congestive heart failure, the kind that goes slow and then all at once. She loved our daughter the way some people love churches, with that quiet, steady kind of faith that doesn't need to announce itself. She held Bryn for the first time in the hospital the morning she was born, and Faye cried, which she almost never did in front of anyone, and she said this child is going to know exactly how loved she is. I keep coming back to that sentence, because what's happened since is that I've watched a man I barely know put a price tag on every minute my granddaughter gets to spend with her grandfather. The thing I want to say right up front is that I'm not the kind of man who looks for a fight. I worked in dispatch. You learn pretty fast in that job that yelling doesn't move trucks. You write things down, you keep a paper trail, you let the loud ones get loud, and you keep the freight moving. That's how I've lived my whole life. So when Theodore started, I tried to give him room. I told myself he was anxious about being a new father. I told myself he came from a different background than me. His folks were lawyers in Cincinnati. His mother was on the board of some kind of arts foundation. People like that have different ways of doing family. I told myself a lot of things. What I should have told myself was that the man was running a game, and my daughter was already most of the way swallowed. The 17 rules. I'll give you the highlights. No unscheduled visits, minimum 48 hours advance notice required. No outings off property without a written itinerary signed by both parents. No food brought into the home that hadn't been pre-approved. No photographs of Bryn taken on my phone unless they remained on my phone. No sharing, no printing, no displaying. No discussion of money or career with my daughter without Theodore present. No religious instruction of any kind. No books with religious themes. No songs. No holiday traditions that centered faith. The last one stung a little extra because Faye had been the one in our family who handled all that. The church on Christmas Eve, the little prayer before dinner on Sundays. And Bryn had learned that prayer from her grandmother before her grandmother died. Theodore knew that. He typed it up anyway. I didn't sign the clipboard. I told him I'd take it home and look it over. He nodded like that was reasonable, but I could see in his face that he'd expected a fight and was a little disappointed not to get one. My daughter walked me out to my truck and stood there with her arms crossed against the cold. Her name is Marin. She's 34. She used to write poetry in high school. Real good poetry. The kind that won contests. And now she sells real estate for her husband's firm, and she has this new way of holding her mouth that I don't recognize. Dad, she said. He just wants things to feel safe. I asked her safe from what? She looked at the porch light for a long time and then she said, you know how he is. I drove the hour and 10 minutes back to my house in Toledo with the clipboard on the passenger seat, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I read it again, and I didn't cry, but I came close. Faye and I bought this house in 1989. Most of the furniture is still hers. There's a coffee mug on the counter that says World's Best Mom that Marin made her in 4th grade, and I haven't been able to put it in a cabinet yet. I sat at that table with the clipboard, and I thought about the day Marin was born, and the day she got married, and the day she called us crying because Bryn had said her first word, which was light, because Marin used to point at the ceiling fixture every time she carried Bryn into the room. Light, Marin would say, light. And then one day Bryn said it back. You don't draft a contract to keep someone like that out of a child's life. You just don't. But I tried to play along for a while. I'm a little embarrassed about that part now, but I'm going to be honest about it because the whole point of telling this is to be honest. I started calling 48 hours ahead. I started parking on the street even though they have a perfectly good driveway because Theodore had mentioned once that my truck made the place look cluttered. I stopped bringing Bryn the little drugstore candy I used to bring, the strawberry hard candies that Faye used to keep in her purse, because Theodore said she couldn't have refined sugar. I sat on their gray couch for 2 hours at a time, Saturday afternoons only, and I watched Bryn line up her stuffed animals on the rug and tell me stories about each one. She named one of them Faye. I don't know if she remembers her grandmother or if she just heard the name and liked it, but every time she said it, something in my chest moved. About 4 months into this arrangement, the visits started getting shorter. First it was, Bryn has a birthday party at 2, can you come at noon and leave by 1:30? Then it was, Bryn's been a little under the weather, maybe just an hour today? Then it was, Theodore's mother is coming up from Cincinnati this weekend, we'd like to keep it just immediate family. I want you to understand the word she used there. Immediate. Like I wasn't. I asked Marin about it on the phone. She said Theodore felt like Bryn was getting overstimulated. I asked her what that meant. She said it meant that Bryn had been having tantrums after my visits, and Theodore had read an article about boundary setting with extended family, and he just wanted to make sure she had a stable emotional environment. I listened to her say all this in a voice that wasn't quite hers, and I knew, the way you know about weather coming in, that this was going somewhere and it wasn't going to a good place. Then came the email. Theodore sent it on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The subject line said, Family Support Framework. I want to read you the part I remember, word for word, because I read it about 40 times. Hollis, in light of recent conversations and our shared interest in Bryn's well-being, Marin and I would like to formalize a contribution structure that reflects your ongoing involvement in our household. We propose a monthly transfer of $1,000 payable on the first of each month into the joint account in exchange for continued scheduled visitation and the maintenance of a healthy extended family environment. We feel this arrangement aligns our values and ensures that everyone's role in Bryn's life is appropriately resourced. Appropriately resourced. He wrote that to me. About my own granddaughter. I have to back up here and tell you something. About 2 years before any of this, when Marin and Theodore were buying their house in Sylvania, I gave them $75,000. That was most of what Faye and I had saved for the down payment on a smaller place we'd been talking about retiring to in Tennessee. After Faye got sick, the Tennessee plan stopped making sense, and when Marin called me and said they'd found a house but the down payment was steep, I wrote her a check that same week. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't ask for it back. I told her I just wanted to see her settled. She cried on the phone and said thank you and said Faye would be so proud, and I believed her, and I still believe she meant it at the time. But money does strange things in a marriage. Money given to one person becomes money owned by two, and the man my daughter married had a particular talent for turning gifts into ledgers. I sat with that email for 2 nights. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't call Marin. I didn't reply. On the 3rd morning, I got in my truck and drove over to my neighbor Carl's place. Carl had retired the year before me, used to be a tax attorney in Cleveland before he came down to be near his daughter. We sat on his back porch and I told him the whole thing from the clipboard to the email, and Carl listened the way old men listen when they've heard enough stories to know when a new one is serious. When I finished, he set his coffee down and he said, Hollis, this is not just disrespectful. There are pieces of this that may not be legal. Don't reply to that email. Don't call your daughter. Come see me at my kitchen table tomorrow morning at 9 and bring every document you have. I want to tell you a few things about Carl Wendt because he became important. Carl is 71 years old. He has hands like baseball mitts and a voice like someone running gravel through a sieve, and he doesn't waste words. He'd practiced family law for the back half of his career, and he knew people. The next morning at his kitchen table, he sat across from me and he listed out in order the things he wanted me to do. Save the email. Save every text. Write down, with dates and times, every canceled visit, every shortened visit, every condition Theodore had ever put on me being in a room with my granddaughter. Pull my bank records for the $75,000. And finally, and this was the part that surprised me, find a forensic accountant. Why, I asked. Because, Carl said, men like your son-in-law don't put a price on a grandfather without already being deep into the math. He's not asking for $1,000 a month because he needs $1,000 a month. He's asking because he's running short somewhere and he's looking for a tributary. I want to know what river he's running dry. Carl made a phone call that afternoon. By the end of the week, I was sitting in an office in downtown Toledo across from a forensic accountant named Loretta Billman, 60-something, sharp as a wire, married for 41 years to a man who built airplane parts. Loretta took my paperwork, asked me about a dozen questions I would never have thought to ask myself, and told me she'd need a few weeks. She also told me very carefully that some of what she was going to do would only be possible because Maren was my daughter and we had a documented financial relationship, and because Theodore had put things in writing that he probably shouldn't have. The email about the $1,000 a month, she said, was what she called a tell. People who feel safe don't write things like that down. For 6 weeks, I lived 2 lives. In one of them, I drove out to Sylvania every Saturday afternoon, parked on the street, sat on the gray couch, and listened to Bryn tell me about her preschool and the names she'd given to all the squirrels in the backyard. In the other life, I sat at Carl's kitchen table or in Loretta's office, and pieces of a picture started to come together that I hadn't wanted to see. Theodore's real estate firm had been bleeding for almost 2 years. Loretta pulled what she could from public filings and from a couple of sources she'd cultivated over a long career, and the picture was rough. He'd overextended on a commercial property in 2023 that had never leased the way he projected. He was carrying personal debt that didn't match his lifestyle, and the lifestyle itself, the new SUV every 2 years, the renovated kitchen, the family trip to Maui Marin had posted about last spring, was being financed in ways I won't pretend to fully understand, but Loretta did, and her face when she explained it told me more than the numbers did. And then there was the $75,000. Loretta had Marin's permission to look at the joint account because Carl had quietly suggested through a mutual contact. Marin had been growing uneasy and had reached out, very tentatively, asking some questions of her own. I didn't know this at the time. I learned it later, but what Loretta found was this. Of the $75,000 I'd given them, only about $42,000 had gone toward the down payment. The rest, around $33,000, had been moved within 90 days into a separate account in Theodore's name alone. That account had been emptied and reopened twice in 2 years, and it had been used to make minimum payments on a credit line tied to his firm, not to anything having to do with the household or with Bryn. I sat in Loretta's office and I looked at the page of numbers she'd printed out for me, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt very calm. Not the okay kind of calm, the other kind. The kind that comes after you've been carrying something heavy for a long time, and you finally set it down and look at it properly for the first time. I asked Carl that night what I should do. He said, you write him a letter. Not from you, from me, on letterhead, and you put the accountant's report in the envelope with it, and then you take it to his house on a Saturday afternoon, the way you always go, and you hand it to your daughter, not to him, and you let her open it. Why her, I asked. Because she deserves to be the one who sees it first, Carl said. She gave you that money too, Hollis. She just didn't know what was being done with it. That part stayed with me for a long time. Maren had been in the room when I wrote that check. She'd hugged me afterward. The money had been hers as much as it had been Theodore's, and the betrayal underneath this whole story wasn't really about me. It was about a husband who'd been quietly draining his wife's family while she sat in the passenger seat and didn't know to look at the gas gauge. The Saturday I brought the envelope was the first really cold day of November. I remember because I almost grabbed Faye's old wool coat out of the closet on my way out the door, and then I put it back and wore my own jacket because I didn't want to be carrying her ghost into a room that didn't deserve it. The envelope sat on my passenger seat the whole drive. I put it in one of those manila ones with the metal clasp, and inside was the letter from Carl, 4 pages, and Loretta's report, 11 pages, and a copy of Theodore's original email, and a copy of the clipboard from 3 years ago, because Carl said you always include the first document, the one where it started, so they remember. Marin opened the door. She had her hair up, the way she wears it when she's trying not to look tired. Theodore was in the living room watching college football. Bryn was on the rug with her dollhouse, the one I'd given her, which had somehow survived all the negotiations and made it down from the basement that morning, which I noted but didn't comment on. Marin saw the envelope in my hand. I think she saw it before she saw me. Honey, I said, I need you to come into the kitchen for a minute. Theodore looked up from the television. What's going on? He said. I held up the envelope so he could see it. I'm going to give this to your wife, I said. I'm going to give it to her in the kitchen. Then I'm going to leave. You and Marin can talk about it. He stood up. He started to walk toward me. I didn't move. I'm not a tall man, but I'm not a small one either, and I've spent enough years standing in a freight yard at 3 in the morning to know how to take up space when I need to. He stopped about 4 feet from me, and he looked at the envelope, and his face did a thing I'll remember for a long time. It went still. Not angry. Not confused. Still. The way a man's face goes when he realizes he's already been caught. And the only question left is how much? Marin took the envelope from me. She didn't ask what was in it. She walked into the kitchen, and Theodore followed her, and I stayed in the doorway with my hands in my pockets, and Bryn looked up from her dollhouse and said, Grandpa Hollis, do you want to see my new pony? And I said, yes, baby, in a minute. And I watched my daughter open the envelope at the kitchen counter. She read the cover letter first. Then she set it down and read the accountant's report. She got about 3 pages in before she sat down on one of the bar stools without taking her eyes off the page. Theodore tried to talk twice, and she held up her hand both times without looking at him. I have never been prouder of my daughter than I was in those 4 or 5 minutes. Whatever the last 3 years had done to the way she held her mouth, the woman I had raised was still in there, and she was reading. When she finished, she looked up at Theodore. She didn't yell. She just said, What is this account in your name? Tell me about this account. I didn't stay for the rest. Carl had been very specific about that. You hand it over and you leave, he'd said. You're not there to fight. You're there to deliver information. The fighting is theirs to do. I knelt down on the rug next to Bryn, and I looked at her new pony, which was purple and had a sparkly mane, and which she had named Faye, like the stuffed animal, like her grandmother. I told her it was a beautiful pony. I told her I loved her. I told her I had to go, but I would see her soon. She asked me to come back tomorrow. I told her I would try. Then I stood up, and I walked past the kitchen without looking in, and I let myself out the front door, and I drove home. Marin called me that night at 9:47. I remember the time because I'd been staring at the clock for an hour. She said, Dad. She said, I didn't know. She said a lot of other things after that, some of them through tears, but that was the part that mattered. I didn't know. And I believed her, because I'd watched her face in that kitchen, and I'd watched the way she'd held up her hand to him when he tried to interrupt, and a woman who'd been in on it doesn't do that. The next few months were not easy. I don't want to make it sound like the envelope fixed everything, because envelopes don't fix marriages. What the envelope did was make a marriage that was already broken visible to the woman inside of it. Marin moved out in February with Bryn and a duffel bag and stayed at my place for almost 6 weeks while the legal piece worked itself out. Theodore tried calling me twice during that stretch. I didn't pick up. Carl handled the communication, and Carl is very good at his job. The $75,000 was treated in the end as a documented loan, and a portion of it was returned to me out of the eventual sale of the Sylvania house. The $33,000 that had moved into Theodore's separate account was harder to recover, and we made the same call. Carl makes a lot, which is that pursuing every dollar costs you more in time and heart than the dollars are worth. Some money is just gone. You set it down and you walk away. Marin and Bryn live about 20 minutes from me now in a townhouse Marin is renting in Perrysburg. Marin went back to writing on the side. Not poetry exactly. She started a blog about families recovering from controlling relationships. And last I checked, it had a few thousand subscribers, which doesn't surprise me, because the woman knows what she's talking about. She works at a real estate firm that isn't her ex-husband's. Bryn started kindergarten in the fall. She is 6 years old. She lost her first tooth in October and called me on the phone with her mouth full of cotton and tried to tell me about it. And I drove over the same evening with the $5 bill because that's what Faye and I used to do for Marin, and I tucked it under Bryn's pillow myself after she fell asleep, which I had to do. Because there's no tooth fairy in this part of the story. There's just a grandfather who finally gets to put $1 under a pillow. I want to say a couple of things to anybody who's still listening, and then I'll let you go. If somebody in your family is being managed away from you, slowly, politely, one reasonable sounding rule at a time, you are not imagining it. The word reasonable is what people use when they want you to stop trusting your gut. Your gut is the part of you that loved that person before there was a checklist. Listen to it. If you have given money to family, write down what it was for, even if it feels cold to do that. Especially then. A piece of paper isn't a sign that you don't trust them. It's a sign that you respect the relationship enough to protect it from what relationships sometimes become. I learned that one the hard way, and I learned it because I had a neighbor who knew what I didn't. And if you're a grandparent in this country, and someone has told you that you don't have rights, find out for yourself. Most states have grandparent visitation provisions. They aren't a magic wand. They are a door. Sometimes you have to walk up to the door and knock before anyone tells you it's there. The last thing. Last week, Bryn came over to spend the night. Faye's old wool coat had been hanging in the front closet since I moved her things out of our bedroom 2 years ago, and Bryn saw it and asked whose it was. I told her it was her grandma's. She asked if she could try it on. It came down past her ankles. She walked around the living room in it, holding the sleeves up so they didn't drag, and she looked at me very seriously and she said, "Grandpa Hollis, I think Grandma was bigger than me." I said, "Baby, she was, but you're growing." She nodded like that was good information. Then she went back to her coloring book, and she sat on the rug in Faye's coat, and she colored a picture of a horse, and she named it Faye, and I sat on the couch and I watched her, and I thought, this is what they tried to put a price on. This right here, a little girl coloring a horse in her grandmother's coat. You can't put a price on it. Some people will try. They will hand you a clipboard. They will send you an email. They will use words like framework and resources and boundary, because those are the words that make the unspeakable sound professional. Don't sign the clipboard. Don't reply to the email. Find a Carl. Find a Loretta. Take your time. Build your envelope. And when you're ready, you walk up to that door and you knock, and you hand it to the person who deserves to see it first. Faye would have liked the part about the coat. She would have called everyone she knew. She would have told the woman at the grocery store and the man at the post office. She would have made a whole production out of it. I like to think, wherever she is, that she saw it. I like to think she's been watching all of this. I like to think she would have said it took me long enough, and then she would have squeezed my hand the way she used to, and she would have said, "But you got there. That's what matters. You got there." I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, and the part I keep coming back to isn't the clipboard or the email, or even the moment in the kitchen when Marin held up her hand to her husband and asked him about that account. The part I keep coming back to is how slow it was. None of this happened in the day. Theodore didn't wake up one morning and decide to put a price on my granddaughter. He drifted there, one polite step at a time, and every step he took, I let him take it because I told myself the next step would be the last one. That's the part I have to own. A man like me, who spent 33 years writing things down for a living, should have written things down sooner. What I've come to believe is that most of the harm done inside families isn't loud. It's quiet, and it dresses up in reasonable clothes, and it uses words like framework and boundary because those words are designed to make a person second-guess their own gut. My gut had been telling me something was wrong from the day Theodore typed up 17 numbered conditions on his real estate letterhead, and I ignored it because I wanted to be the bigger man. I want to tell you something about being the bigger man. Sometimes being the bigger man is the thing that lets the smaller man keep stealing. Patience is not the same as silence. I had to learn that one in my late 50s, and I'm not proud of how long it took. If there is anything worth carrying out of this, it's 3 things, and I'll say them plainly. The first is that character holds. Marin had been managed and worn down and rerouted for years, but the woman who sat on that bar stool and read every page of Loretta's report without flinching was the same girl who used to write poetry, good enough to win contests. People don't actually disappear. They get buried. Sometimes all you have to do is hand them the shovel. The second is that being smart about something is not the same as being cold about it. I didn't go over there to humiliate Theodore. I went over there because Carl was right that Marin deserved to be the one who saw it first, and because information, set down in front of a person calmly, does more work than any amount of yelling ever has. The kitchen table did the talking. I just brought the envelope. The third is the one I want you to take with you if you take nothing else. Strength is not the same as noise. I spent a lot of my life thinking that standing up for yourself meant getting louder, and what I've learned, late, is that the people who can hurt you the most are the ones who count on you being too tired or too polite to write things down. Write things down. Find a Carl. Find a Loretta. Trust the slow, careful, deliberate part of yourself that knows how to wait. Brenna's going to grow up in a house where her mother gets to be herself again. And that didn't happen because I shouted. It happened because I stayed quiet long enough to put the right pieces in the right envelope, and then I walked up to a door and knocked.